Welcome. I'm Yvonne Haddad from the Al-Walid Center for Muslim Christian Understanding. We're delighted you're here. We have a very important topic that we want to discuss today. Students in Professor Brown's class, there's a list, there's a sheet of paper for you to sign. So we're checking on you to make sure you're here. And I'm delighted to introduce our speaker today. She's going to talk about the Berets are okay and headscarves are not. Obviously, when she gave us this topic, she didn't know how very, very important this is today. Sarah Alouane is a PhD candidate in public law at the University of Toulouse Capitol. And her research focuses on religious freedom, civil liberties, constitutional law, and human rights. And all of you have read the description of who she is and what she does. I don't want to take from her time, since we're going to have to break out because there's a class after this. So please go ahead.
Hello, everyone. I'm really delighted to give this talk today. And as she mentioned, I didn't know, like, in advance what was going to happen. I was in the US, actually, when it happened. Literally, I arrived the day before. So, I mean, I could have been stuck in France because now the borders are closed. Schengen agreements are suspended. So, when it happened, I was like, oh, I will have to change my talk, what I'm going to do. But no, actually, I didn't change much because I think that to understand what's going on right now, not just the attacks, but just the situation regarding Muslim minorities, you need to understand how French deal with minorities, and especially Muslim minorities. You will excuse my accent. I'm French. So I will try to not speak too fast, and if you have any question, I would be delighted to answer. The Muslim minority in France is largely a product of the 60s immigration and the aftermath of the Algerian War of Independence, and is the most numerically significant in Europe. Muslims outnumber Protestants and Jews and rank as the country's second largest religion. Precise numbers are not available because since 1872, the French Republic prohibited the recording of any distinction between its citizens regarding either race or religious beliefs in censuses. So basically, we do not have official data because it's illegal and unconstitutional. We have estimates, though, and various estimates put the Muslim population at anywhere between approximately 3 and 10% of the total population, presently around 64 million in metropolitan France, with the main countries of affiliation being Algeria and Morocco, and also a bit of Tunisia, as opposed to predominantly Moroccan Muslims in Spain, for example, or Pakistani Muslims in Britain, and Turkish Muslims in Germany. One might ask, why are there so many issues regarding Muslims' identity in France? And I think you have been following the news. When there is a clearly defined concept of laïcité, which many people think means secularism. The answer is that laïcité is derived from the principle of secularism. It has a unique standing in France, which results in the superiority of Judean Christian culture over other systems, which I will try to explain. For the French, laïcité is a concept that has come to represent what it means to be French, the cornerstone of the Republic, and is used by politicians, scholars, and also citizens to describe a conceptual foundation of French politics and culture and the modern French politic. Although the modern notion of laïcité is seen by some as promoting tolerance, laïcité originated in a period of French history that was rife with conflict and hostility towards religion. After the storming of the Bastille during the French Revolution in 1789, the new government seized property of the Catholic Church and shortly after completely reorganized the structure of the Catholic Church in France, severing ties with the Pope altogether. For several years, the French Republic essentially controlled the Catholic Church in France, and soon after, the revolutionaries turned on Protestant and Jews, beginning a movement to secularize the nation. In 1795, a new law passed that formally separated church and state, and it included a prohibition on the wearing of religious ornaments or clothing in public. So nothing is new here. This time period was characterized by a recurring demand that citizens choose between their religion and the state. In 1901, France adopted the law on associations, which, despite including progressive provisions on the freedom of association, also required parliamentary recognition and approval of what we called religious congregations. 4 years later, the National Assembly adopted the law on the separation of churches and state, the Act of 1905, which is still into force, designed by the Socialist Party in negotiation with a right-wing minority of parliament, which did not vote, but did not disapprove the law. According to legal scholars, this liberal legal framework was built on three overriding principles: freedom of conscience, separation of state and churches, and the equal respect of all faiths and beliefs. The law was viewed as a reaction to the growing power of the Catholic Church in public affairs and represented a far more peaceful response to a perceived threat to the Republic than revolutionary ancestors took a century earlier. Public subsidization of religious institutions ended, and the state was to remain neutral toward religious beliefs in the public sphere, making no endorsements of any religious beliefs. In the modern era, laïcité has come to represent the collective public identity of the French people, the cornerstone of a national identity based on French values, though nowhere were these values specifically defined. And in the absence of such a definition, various cultural and political influences have taken control of this definition to the detriment of minorities, including and especially Muslim minorities. French citizens from all political backgrounds now view laïcité as a reflection of national identity in the public sphere, and a majority is using laïcité to protect a collective French identity from minority influences which are seen as a threat to the unity of the country. For centuries, laïcité was used to reduce the influence of the Catholic Church on governance, but with the arrival of significant immigrant population, and especially after the decolonization period, laïcité is now seen as a concept that requires an individual in the public space to abstract himself or herself from their traditions, histories, from their roots, as part of a sort of social contract, moving the collective citizenry from pluralism to unity through consent. From this French perspective, the individual joins other individuals to live together in a monocultural society, as opposed, for example, to the Anglo-Saxon, and by Anglo-Saxon I mean United States, the United Kingdom, Canada, at some extent Australia as well, as opposed to this Anglo-Saxon view of freedom of religion that promotes pluralism and a society made up of diverse individuals and communities allowed to self-define by religion, race, or ethnicity. In the last few decades, laïcité has centered on a fear of Europe sliding towards a Muslim-dominated Eurabia. And as France is home to the largest Muslim population in Western Europe, it is the epicenter of this movement. The influx of Muslim immigrants in the last few decades has caused communal tension and has led to the manipulation of laïcité in the public discourse and parliament. And I will try to explain this phenomenon through two huge cases, which was a turning point of the whole thing, which are the Headscarf Affair and the ban of the full face covering. First, the Headscarf Affair. The problem began in 1989 when a couple of Muslim students in Paris' suburbs wearing the hijab, so the Islamic headscarf, were expelled from school on the ground that they violated the laïcité and neutrality of the school. And of course, a debate starting on a possible ban of the hijab at school. This ban targeting the wearing of the hijab, the number affected by the ban were estimated at 15,000 by the Minister of Interior, but according to the Minister of Education, only 2,000 Muslim girls were actually affected. And it's interesting, I don't know if it's a coincidence, but this is the same number quoted in estimates of Muslim women in France wearing the full face covering and affected by the ban concerning the garment. It might be a coincidence. I don't know. We don't have estimates, right? Under the French laïcité, wherein in public space are required to be neutral with respect to religion in accordance with a strict separation of church and state, there was suspicion of the hijab representing the wearer's religious affiliation. So in 1989, France's highest administrative court, the Conseil d'État, the Council of State, gave a broad interpretation to laïcité by finding that the wearing of a headscarf by a Muslim schoolgirl as a symbol of religious expression in public school was not incompatible with the principle unless it was shown to be compelling threat to public order or to the regular delivery of educational services. So actually it was quite accommodating at first. In particular, the court noted, and I'm going to quote the Conseil d'État, the wearing of signs by students in which they wish to express their membership in a religion is not by itself incompatible with the principle of laïcité. As long as you do not disturb public order, you can wear whatever you want. The laïcité only applies, and there is no debate around it, to civil servants. There is no discussion about it. A civil servant cannot show their religious affiliation. But at least before 2004, when it comes to students and the user of public services, they could wear whatever they want as long as they do not disturb public order. Despite that relatively tolerant stance, state officials proceeded to undermine this ruling. Ministerial directives allowed discretion for teachers to ban the headscarf on the grounds of respect for the principle of laïcité. In 1994, following the victory of the French Conservative Party, so the right wing, over the socialists, the directive drew a distinction between discrete and ostentatious religious symbol, the latter including the headscarf. Don't ask me when ostentatious begins, because nobody really knows. So some religious articles were said to be ostentatious and a form of proselytizing by their very nature, a characterization that might be applicable later to the full face covering. Disputed bans that were brought before the Conseil d'État, the Council of State, were largely overturned, and relative peace was restored. However, in 2003, the issue again erupted into controversy, and the government appointed the Stasi Commission, so Stasi was the person who led the commission, to review the principle of laïcité in practice in the Republic. The education system in particular has been the site of controversial application of laïcité, being as it is a critical institution for contesting and constructing notions of personal identity, including the national values of the French Republic and also private identities going to inter alia religious beliefs. The Commission report that is still available on the internet recognized the personal choice of Muslim schoolgirls to wear the headscarf, but also noted the possibility of this choice creating external pressure. For example, it noted that a failure to wear it might stigmatize other young Muslim women. The Commission's rationale was that the expression of religious values in France must bow to the fundamental value of laïcité in the French state and must account for both the equality of the sexes and the safeguarding of the rights of minors. The report stated that religion must, I quote, renounce its political dimension. Laïcité is incompatible with any conception of religion that hopes to rule over the social system or the political order. The Commission recommended a prohibition on religious and political clothing and symbols in public schools in order to preserve laïcité and affirm the values of state secularity and religious neutrality. The report has been strongly criticized both by human rights activists but also by legal scholars. For example, for its failure to provide evidence for its assertion of a threat to public order, for failing to engage in any meaningful discussion of the rights involved, for conceptual inconsistencies in recommending a coercive withholding of educational benefits to deal with the alleged coercion of Muslim girls, and for failing to demonstrate any likely positive outcome from a ban. Given the weaknesses of the report and the earlier findings of the Conseil d'État, it would seem that any headscarf ban would rest on dubious legal or public policy grounds and rely heavily on popular sentiment. Regardless of the issues raised in the Commission's report, in 2004, the Parliament approved a new law prohibiting the wearing of visible religious symbols through which the student exhibits conspicuously a religious affiliation in schools under the principle of laïcité. And of course, you cannot just prohibit the hijab, otherwise it would be discrimination, right? So symbols prohibited by the law including the headscarf, the Jewish kippah, the Sikh turbans, large Christian crosses, but tolerated discrete symbols, like the Stars of David or Fatima's hand. But clearly the law was aimed first at Muslims. The problem with this law, I'm going to tell you, law is supposed to be precise and clear. Nothing in this law describes what is a religious symbol. And I agree, it is not the job of the legislator to do it. It would be a blatant violation of separation of church and state, right? But the least you can do is, if you make a law, at least explain what you're doing. And this law, until today, causes issues in its interpretation. A couple of months ago, a girl was, like 2015, right? A girl was expelled from school. So she's a hijabi, but when she goes to school, she removes her hijab. And so she wears a long skirt. The long skirt was deemed, was considered as violating the laïcité. So I guess when Kim Kardashian wears a long skirt, it's okay. When it's a Muslim girl, she violates the principle of laïcité. It's still, I don't have further info because it's still going on and probably going before court at some point. And a similar controversy over, regarding the Headscarf Affair, actually we can make a parallel with the second affair I'm going to talk about, which is the ban of the full face covering, so the Niqab or the burqa. In April 2010, a national debate on the place of Islam, because it's always like this, when it comes to politics, we are going to talk about Islam, just in order to get more votes, because that was the case back in then, right? A national debate on the place of Islam, and specifically the Niqab, was ignited. The debate was instigated by strong media coverage of the first case of police finding a Niqabi woman for posing a danger to public safety. So this woman was wearing a Niqab, was driving, she was arrested by a policeman. She was fined because the policeman said, "You are a danger to public safety." And a whole outcry started, mainly because of media too, right? The Conseil d'État released a report in 2010 upon request of the then government that strongly criticized the adoption of such a ban. Still, the Conseil d'État actually was quite sane, was actually the only sane institution during that time. The Conseil d'État actually accepted certain cases where the full face covering could be banned, such as, for example, airport security, right? Or at the bank, where you have to control your identity for obvious reason. But they remained totally opposed to a total ban. Yet, the government ultimately did not follow the Conseil d'État advice. They don't have to. And submitted the bill to the parliament, which adopted it by an overwhelming majority. It's not left or right wing, right? Actually, the whole debate started with a communist mayor, and it ended up with a right wing debate. So it was both the left and the right wing. This law used the ambiguous notion of the violation of women's human dignity. In France, human dignity is a component of public order. So they use human dignity to justify the ban. They couldn't do it with laïcité because it would be a discrimination, right, towards women. Despite the Conseil d'État warning about the weakness of such a definition of human dignity. Though this ban targets a different group and a different space. This ban targets adult Muslim women in public spaces in general. But the law banning the full face covering in public goes significantly further than the headscarf ban in two important ways. First, as I mentioned, the target group is women, and in particular Muslim women. It is not about teenage girls, who are still, seeking for their identity. I mean, you can maybe understand, and I don't say I agree, right? But you can understand the logic for teenage girls who are still looking for their identity, and you might think that there must be some family pressure, etc. I'm talking about the logic. Here, we are talking about grown-up women who decided, for whatever reasons, to cover their faces. So, autonomous women. Second, the arena is not school, in which the state is very much involved as a sponsor and promoter of certain values and behaviors of character and citizenship, and has historically sought to provide an education free from religious influences. Rather, in that case, the geographic space of the full face covering ban covers all public spaces, including streets, parks, and private businesses. And nobody thought that it would actually be good to define what is a public space, because nobody can. The ban effectively confines determined believers to their homes or mandate a painful compromise as a price for public presence. On the other hand, I'm trying to find a balance here, right? One might argue that the authentic scarf is not the relatively innocuous headscarf covering just the hair and leaving a public expression exposed, but rather the all-encompassing full face covering. The full face covering covers all but the eyes and hands, precludes any kind of social connections, and sends much stronger and more discordant message to the non-Islamic observer. Those messages might include an aggressive assertion of a hostile and incommensurable religious belief, a crude statement by the wearer of their status as the other. It also may be considered as a signal that the wearer is a potential threat to both the French way of life and notion of citizenship. There is a sort of unspoken expectation that all French citizens be open to a certain opportunity for sociability as part of some shared sense of humanity, but with a warning that one is to leave one's religion at home. It must be emphasized that as a founding myth and a constitutional value born out of a distinctive history, laïcité claims a place in the French character which is difficult for outsiders to fully appreciate. One's particular understanding of laïcité is tied to one's sense of identity. Just as it is the case with theocratic religions, one might arguably characterize laïcité as constituting a type of civil religion, or at least a legitimizing myth, in that it represents a set of beliefs and values that give French society a transcendent sense of its collective consciousness and destiny. The belief in a set of shared basic values as an organizing principle, with the state as a kind of enforcing deity, might be seen as the equivalent of a religious belief. This belief, given its unique place in French social and political culture, might transcend conflicting conventional religious beliefs, at least where those beliefs are aggressively and to French minds offensively asserted in the guise of symbols such as the Niqab or the burqa. More specifically, in the marketplace of religious ideas, laïcité acts as a kind of civil religion that is empowered as a trump card. The question becomes whether or not competition is to be tolerated, or whether it would be instead of the full face covering to severely undermine this founding myth itself, which includes certain liberal values. The French Republic is married not only to principles of laïcité, but also to certain foundational principles of liberal democracy, which are commonly seen as incommensurable with Islam. The full face covering seems to say to non-Muslims that the wearer is consciously choosing to reject the host country's cultural and religious mores, that the wearer declines to integrate into French society, and that the wearer is proclaiming her otherness as ostentatiously as she can. It was said during the debate. Notwithstanding specific concern about, motorcycles, helmets, winter scarves, and headgear, sunglasses, etc., there is a claim to a more general right to view the faces of strangers and to demand at least the possibility of a glance, smile, or other kind of social interactions. But, desirable though sociability may be between citizens, is there an enforceable obligation to be sociable, or for citizens to at least present the opportunity for sociability? Or is there any duty going to the integration of all into society? Furthermore, there is another more troubling aspect of a quasi-feminist argument, namely that it seeks to impose a motivation on this woman that may well not be supportable. There must be some, perhaps many, and possibly most, who voluntarily choose to wear the full face covering for a variety of reasons that do not trouble liberal values. The stated objective of emancipating Muslim women by removing the veil is thereby countered by the argument that the veil itself is considered by some who wear it to be emancipatory. Whatever the motivation, it is inappropriate for strangers to their culture and to the individual women to impose their own preferred motivations and deny authentic choice to the woman in question. How can we presume to say that we know better than them why they are wearing full face covering and proceed to forbid them free will? That is precisely what we accuse their oppressors of doing. This is and is most likely to be seen as patronizing, condescending, and a denial of autonomy. Repeating the patriarchal gesture, I'm asking. Is this not a breach of the right to define and pursue one's personal vision of the good life, which is a bedrock of difference by liberalism, and even more so of difference inclusive multicultural liberalism? The liberal protection of religious freedom is more complex than it may appear. The specific protection it is afforded in the constitutions of liberal states suggests that religion is indeed special, though not solely because it is a fundamental aspect of one's personal belief system. Religion is seen as both something that needs to be protected, but also a potential threat to the state itself. If we accept the principle of laïcité in public spaces as a fundamental value, a civic religion with a particularly French provenance and a genuine threat can be shown from a more traditional religious source, then perhaps even liberal right discourse could sustain a credible argument for the full face covering ban. However, the French Conseil d'État, so the same court I was talking about previously, the French Conseil d'État itself ruled that religious dress such as Islamic headscarves or symbol in school were acceptable under laïcité, short of them being ostentatious, provocative, or proselytizing, in other words, rejecting an outright ban on headscarves. Unfortunately, when the opportunity to reflect on the issue arose in regard to the headscarf controversy, the Stasi Commission I mentioned previously failed to give any real substance to and far less evidence either for or against the argument for such an accommodation. As a result, the political debate swirling around the ban tended to dissolve into a more general sphere of Islamic fundamentalism. That fear was mirrored by a suspicion, at least among Muslims and some academics, that the ban also continued a long history of elevating European civilization over Islamic societies. The unacknowledged elephant in the room that is still present in any debates related to the wearing of religious signs, especially the Muslim one. In a decision SAS versus France by the European Court of Human Rights in July 2014, uphold the ban, though they rejected the human dignity argument. It was a terrible decision because literally, if you read the decision, it says how horrible it is, but in the end said, well, there is a margin of appreciation to the state, so basically they can do whatever they want. And second, we must respect the living together. Don't ask me what is living together. I'm a jurist, I still don't know what it is. There are only two dissenting opinions that I recommend you to read, which is a dissenting opinion of the Swedish and the German judge, which basically said it was dangerous to do that. Sadly, there was a minority, so the ban was upheld. And many European countries, such as Belgium, but also just a couple of days ago, Switzerland, followed France's example. The notion, and I will conclude with that, the notion of veiling is a very sensitive issue for many, from Muslim women who freely wear the veil out of respect for their faith, to certain outspoken feminists who view the veil as an archaic, patriarchal symbol that denigrates and oppresses women. Whatever the views on the issues, it is dangerous to assume that those who choose a veil do so for any particular reason, and to assume that the veil is anathema to the democratic safeguards of equality and secularism. And I will conclude with that, especially regarding the current situation, as long as France does not solve its larger identity crisis. Religious minorities, and especially Muslims, will always be seen as a threat to French unity, and as long as this situation lasts, the future of laïcité will be at stake due to its perpetuous malicious manipulation. Perhaps it is time for France to finally rethink the concept of laïcité so as to include diversity instead of erasing it. And I will end with a quote of one of my favorite Syrian-American authors, Moja Kaf. The veil, well, she is talking about the veil. It is like a second skin to me. It is supple as a living membrane and moves and flows with me. There is beauty and dignity in its fall and sweep. It is my crown and my mantle, my vestments of grace. Its pleasure unknown to me, if not to you. Thank you very much for your attention.